Next speaker is Professor Shambu Prasad. Professor C. Shambu Prasad is a professor under Strategic Management and Social Sciences at the Institute of Rural Management, Anand. Dr. Shambu Prasad's expertise and research straddles several interdisciplinary fields such as managing producer collectives, social entrepreneurship, rural livelihoods, innovation management, science and technology studies, and sustainable agriculture. He has published extensively and edited a 2-volume series titled Farming Futures, featuring 15 case studies on farmer producer organizations in the year 2023 and social enterprises in the year 2019. He currently chairs the Expert Committee on Department of Science and Technologies program on Science and Society and serves on the board of a few nonprofit organizations, including the National Innovation Foundation and Archaea. He is a recipient of the Vgis CSIE IITM Award in 2013 for academic contribution to social entrepreneurship and been a Fulbright Senior Research Fellow at Cornell University. He founded IRMA's Incubator for Social Enterprises and Entrepreneurships for Development as a unique incubator focused exclusively on rural, social, and collective enterprises, and is an advisor and mentor to several social enterprises. Let me now invite Professor Shambu Prasad for his presentation. Over to you, sir.
Thanks a lot to the Government of Kerala for this opportunity to share one's work in a seminar that's of great relevance. As was mentioned by Mr. Shaji, I think Kerala can lead the way for cooperatives in the rest of the country as well. I'd like to start off by sharing something that happened a few days back. I had asked my students about name 2 cooperatives from your state. And while we have a large number of people from Kerala, very few of them could mention the Uralungal cooperative and many of the other initiatives that are happening here. So I'd like to suggest that it is this younger generation that needs to know all these stories of cooperatives, and many of these, exciting things happening here should reach out much farther, and what is the potential of cooperatives as well. Even as we need to explore how can we form newer cooperatives, how can we make them viable? I think some of the earlier speakers mentioned that. What should be the role of the state, and how within those 7 principles should we not focus more on the 4th principle of autonomy and independence? I come from the state of Gujarat. Most respected Malayali in Gujarat is Dr. Vgis Kuran, who helped form the cooperative movement in the dairy sector. I think if we go back a little to look at what's happened post-pandemic, there's some very good examples of how to deal with the pandemic. But a significant part of what should happen post-pandemic is something we need to explore. It is during the pandemic that the contribution of the cooperatives came out very strongly. If you look at the banks in Germany, the cooperative banks lent $30 billion as opposed to the mainstream bank, including Deutsche Bank, which did only about $8 billion. So this, in a bad year, the cooperatives do much better to their members, and that's when these institutions start getting noticed. But I think one of the things that we need to look at beyond the pandemic is the nature of institutions that we have to build. And I think there is now increasing evidence that after the pandemic, inequality between countries and inequality within countries is increasing at a rapid rate. And I believe cooperatives have an important role to play in this. So a key thing is, how do we build these kinds of institutions? And I'd like to quote Dr. Kurien. This is a speech he gave 24 years back. And he says, let's discover the truth that the unlettered villager is often the wisest of teachers and that without our guidance and direction, the villager survives and even thrives in conditions we could not face. Why then should we not place our faith in him and let him be responsible for his own destiny? Is our reflection of our, it is our reflection of our lack of faith in our farmers' ability to manage their own affairs that the bureaucracy has so deeply penetrated and controlled people's organizations. In my opinion, to continue to justify and perpetuate the hegemony of an insensitive bureaucracy, arguing that people cannot organize and manage their own affairs and that they will not employ professionals, is not only naive, but reflects self-serving hypocrisy of the worst kind. I think within this code is this prescient nature that the cooperatives are an independent entity beyond the market and the state. Both have an important role to play. The cooperatives have to work along with them. I'd like to move to an area that I've been working and a few of us have been working, which is on farmer producer organizations. And I'll speak a little bit about the a study that we've done on farmer producer organizations. In the last 2 decades, official figures indicate that there were 30,000 farmer producer companies that were set up under various schemes and so on. In the same 20 years, if you look at the number of agricultural cooperatives that have been set, it would probably be less than about 2,000 or 3,000. Our study was to look at it through this book. It's called Farming Futures, Reimagining Producer Organizations in India. And we were trying to understand how have they been faring. How easy is it for them to do the business? So I'd like to make a few broad kind of directions from there. So one part of it is that the earlier cooperative movement has had a certain kind of exclusion, perhaps not so much in the state of Kerala, but in other kinds of places. Small and marginal farmers have been not being members of the board of most of the primary agricultural credit societies. The same applies to women and tribals as well. In states like Madhya Pradesh and Odisha, their percentage is about 10 to 25%, whereas their overall population is 70 to 80% of the farming community. Most cooperatives have formed around sectoral support. To take the case of the dairy industry, institutions were built like Amul and the National Dairy Development Board, which is a single institution that looked after multiple requirements of dairy farmers, capacity building, training, working out their business plans, erecting things, etc. Today, we are not in a situation for farmer producer organizations where there is one single institution that exists in the non-dairy sector. So how do you create cooperatives where knowledge is distributed is a huge case. These institutions have had huge amount of expectations. So if you look at the 14-volume Doubling Farm Income report, there are about 280 references to FPOs. And, they are seen as the key institutions to try and bring about this change. But if you look at the investments made in supporting and training members, I think it's nowhere close to being commensurate. We looked at 15 cases of FPOs, not any from Kerala. This is across the country. And I'd like just to share a few broad insights that we are getting from these 15 enterprises. So the first thing, and I think some of the earlier speakers also mentioned about it, is that in a post-liberalized world, with India becoming increasingly globalized, the nature of these institutions are going to be very different. So the first thing we realized is, can we reimagine FPOs and cooperatives broadly as beyond being, meant only for social welfare of the members, but also as social enterprises? So there is a lot of talk internationally about the social solidarity economy. So how do you frame cooperatives to become more different? How can they become more viable and purposeful? And some of it without the kind of support that perhaps the state has been providing for them in the past. And this state support has been declining significantly over a period of time. The second critical question that we looked at is, how do you engender FPOs? Agriculture is seen as the domain of men. And if you look at agriculture today, there's a huge amount of feminization, and not recognizing women as farmers is an important element. And at the same time, you realize that some of the most robust institutions at a sub-village level have been the rapid growth of the self-help group movements. They have such a huge social capital, and if they've been able to run these institutions, how can these institutions form the basis or the foundation for the collective enterprises of the future? So we looked at 6 out of the 12 FPOs. There were 3 federations. And we found that there were 3 women CEOs also running these enterprises. So the thing about engendering FPOs is not about just tokenism, have a certain amount of reservation, and the institutional mechanism is the same. But it requires a serious kind of gender analysis of how things are happening. An example is the Krishidan FPO, which works across 7 districts. Midway, they did a gender analysis, and they found that they had only 16% membership of women. And after the gender analysis, they worked towards increasing the membership, and today it stands at 27%. So as we look at the future of institutions today, I think the role of women cannot be underemphasized. Women are likely to take up issues of sustainability of agriculture much more than men. And we saw this in the case of the Ram Rahim Producer Company, a fully women-led FPO of tribal women. They were trading with soybean in the commodity exchange market. But after a while, they said, why can't we try and move towards sustainable agriculture? And they moved towards non-pesticide management of their dal and other things. And they've linked with the social enterprise. And they're doing pretty well, even as their neighbors are facing challenges with the decline in the soybean market. Women also look at enterprises very differently. So we've noticed that women favor stability of the organization than rapid kind of growth. So the broad point is that while we want enterprises to be successful, the metrics that we use for measuring these enterprises is very different. Today, while there are so many cooperative banks, the lending of cooperative banks to these FPOs have been minimal, if not none, in most of the states. So the cooperative banks should look at all these agricultural cooperative institutions, including the ones in Kerala, to start lending with them, lending to them. We have had the SHG bank linkage. FPO bank linkage is still at a very nascent and incipient state. Most banks don't lend to farmer producer organizations. So how can cooperative banks rethink about these institutions that are coming outside their fold? They follow the same kind of principles of cooperatives. In some cases, they are even more inclusive than the existing institutions. And it's important for these cooperative banks to also look at some of these institutions. They're not big. Some of them are small. They have 300 members, 500 members, 600 members, etc. The third part is to have a greater focus on the entrepreneurial side of the business. We've looked at the business model, and we do realize that they face the same kinds of challenges as a startup. It takes 3 to 4 years for them to become profitable. It takes 2 to 3 years for them to search for the right kind of business model. There are significant fluctuations that you see in their business model. And you find this, that we have to train people to understand this, the cycles of business. How do you develop the business acumen of these enterprises? And I think in this, training and capacity development plays a very important role. But the key is to try and do this very differently than using the conventional methods of training. We've had some experience with other enterprises on using participatory methods where, members who are board of directors are empowered at the end of it to take decisions on their own. We've also recorded the CEOs of FPOs making their own pitch to a district collector on how does it mean to try and speak about their vision of their organization. So in terms of governance, and I'll spend a little bit of time on that we need to have newer models. These are much smaller institutions, not like the cooperatives, which have much larger kinds of space. How do you get professionals on board? The farmer producer companies has this position for expert directors. So some of the people from IRMA who are seniors have said they've set up an institution called Seniors in Seva. They said, we are willing to be expert directors in any of these places. So it will be useful for many of these institutions to take their services. It is also important to look at non-members differently. They can contribute to the institutions as well. So just to conclude, what does this mean for the future of cooperatives? So the first is that there's a lot of potential that is unrealized, and it is important for us to rethink this potential of these cooperatives. So cooperatives in the future are not going to be so much on size, but they need to be seen as incubators of many social startups or rural entrepreneurs. Not all the activities need to be done by the cooperatives. That probably was an own model, even with Amul. End-to-end integration of the value chain is something that is very difficult for a new cooperative to do today, but they can try and be an important cog or an important element in which these institutions are reworked. So they have to be smart and be effective as well. It's important to break these silos between PACs and FPCs. And how can they be effective in the state? Huge amount of investment in capacity building. And I think an important part that's missing in the cooperative sector is the absence of serious research on how these institutions are working. And I think there is a role for institutions like IRMA and many academic institutions. Many of these academic institutions are not engaged with the cooperatives. The book that we have done is based on people who are academics and development practitioners across the country working together to make this difference. And I think we need to build a solid research inputs on the stories of Uralungal, many other kinds of cooperatives, and therefore this engagement. And finally, I think the relationship with the state, even as there are lots of schemes coming up, etc., it's important for us to look at how is it that these institutions maintain their autonomy and they are not only state driven. Thank you very much.